My name is Erin, and I received a master's in genetics from the Department of Human Genetics in 2017 here at UChicago. So I'm a UChicago alumna from the grad programs. And that might be kind of an odd background, like probably a little different than the people who usually speak at Epic Career Series. And that's going to be a theme throughout. And we're going to start with this picture that I generated using AI. All of society and civilization, things that we built up that underlie our systems, they weren't built to be in harmony with our environment. Usually they were taking advantage of it. And so that means that we're going to need everybody involved in fighting this battle together. There's so many imbalances to solve for and so many different approaches that we're going to need to use. And to get to the top where we live in harmony with our environment again, we're going to need to alter the values and behaviors and provide incentives for both people and businesses and systems. And we're going to need both simple and complex solutions. And we're going to need to use like tried and true methods like sustainable farming, as well as innovations that we've never even thought of before. And when I was an undergrad, I thought that a career in environmentalism, like to help solve this problem, looked something like this. So I thought if I wanted to fight climate change, I would need to go out and collect samples in the wild, run back to the lab and do some analyses, and then go yell at the coal plant for polluting too much, right? That's sort of like the career in environmentalism that I pictured. But today, I hope to show you a different one that you won't learn about in school. Many careers out there in environmentalism, because we have so many problems to tackle, don't look anything like this. And so no matter where you're coming from, no matter what your other interests are, you can usually find a way to help. And so I encourage you to follow your passions and utilize your strengths to find the best way to make your impact. So today I'm going to talk just chronologically through my career, starting with undergrad. We're going to talk about undergrad finding sustainability, my time here at graduate school and starting a sustainable laboratory program. And then I'll go through 4 stages of my career in different ways that you could make an impact. But again, the idea here is like, there are so many ways. These are just some examples. And we're gonna end with me joining the first carbon management company to go public. Okay. So I was a little bit of an odd high schooler. Maybe you could relate to this. I knew I wanted to study genetics. And so I looked around the country, and there were only 5 programs that had molecular genetics as their major. And one of them was the University of Rochester. And I visited in the fall and fell in love with it because it's beautiful. And so I went there for my undergrad. And in that time, I loved studying genetics, but I also did a lot of extracurriculars. Oh, and I should say, at the end of each of these slides, I'll pause for questions, okay? So feel free to ask. Okay, so I got involved with a lot of extracurriculars. I joined a sorority. I kept playing volleyball. I was on the club volleyball team. And I was a founding member of the sustainable living floor there called Green Space. This was our first ever event. It's a classic recycled materials fashion show, right? And I absolutely loved all of those extracurriculars. And they also have given me a lot of really important skills that I've taken with me throughout my career. Working with others, leadership, organizing, and gaining consensus. And so I definitely encourage you to pursue all of your interests, even if they're outside of academia. And you never know when those interests actually are qualifications for something later down the road. Okay, so I studied genetics. Specifically, I fell in love with molecular evolution. I took a class on it my junior year. And when I was looking at all the things I could do after undergrad, I wanted to study that. And so that's what led me to the University of Chicago. Pause for questions. You can always ask them later too. Okay, so I was pursuing a PhD studying the evolution of the human brain using molecular genetics here at the University of Chicago, in the Biological Sciences Division, Department of Human Genetics. I joined the lab of Vincent Lynch. He's not here anymore. He's at University of Buffalo now. But my PhD thesis would have been titled The Molecular Mechanisms Underlying Human Neocortical Expansion. So what does that mean? So I was studying genes and gene regulatory elements that had mutations in the human lineage compared to all the other primates that could have possibly been involved with the expansion of the human brain. So then we would like identify them and test them in the lab, right? Prove it out a little bit more. Importantly, during this time, a lot of genetics works, you're coding. So I learned how to write in R, but I actually really fell in love with that and enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. And I also, during this time, so this was like 2015, 2016, and I became more and more preoccupied with how much waste I was creating in the lab and how big of a problem climate change was looming over us all and turning out to be. And so I started a sustainable laboratory program in all my free time. And I started it with a bunch of other graduate students who were in the labs. So a lot of my friends from my PhD program, as well as a lot of lab managers who were responsible for like ordering and stuff like that. And we started this sustainable lab program. It's called UChicago Green Labs. I don't know if it exists. It doesn't exist in the same form if it does anymore. But I do know that they have the programs that I started still going because I saw them in the Earth Day newsletter. They have a Shut the Sash campaign and then like a freezer chill up program that's a competition. So that's all still happening. But at the time, it was a group of graduate students and other people working in the labs. And we started kind of grassroots, but then we realized we needed the buy-in of EHS and facilities, right, to do like some bigger programs. And so that was a learning moment as well. It's like grassroots can only get you so far. At some point, you're going to need to learn to find the common ground with the people who have more power. And you can find ways that you align with them either through sustainability and safety, or maybe saving money, improving processes, right? So something to remember as you move on from here. Okay. So I was really preoccupied with climate change, and I was studying the evolution of the human brain. Those two things, they don't really go together. If you can come up with a really neat way of having them perfectly merge, let me know. But I looked at this and I said, I don't want to study human genetics for the rest of my career. How do I combine my two skills? And the answer is sort of an unexpected one. It was refrigerant. Okay, so who here has heard of chlorofluorocarbons? Okay. Anyone who didn't raise their hand, have you heard of R12 or Freon? Freon, yeah. So that's what's pictured here, right? All right, I'm going to get back to that in a second, but I want to give you a little background first. But any questions about like my time at UChicago? So, have you heard of Project Drawdown? So for those who haven't heard of it, it is a science-based program or like roadmap for identifying the most impactful strategies for attacking the climate change problem. So they have recommendations that span all sorts of industries. I highly recommend you check out Project Drawdown if you're not yet familiar. And this is a slide from their website. So it shows all of the greenhouse gas emissions by source. The biggest one that we all know about, right, is burning of fossil fuels releasing CO2. We also have CO2 from deforestation, land use, agriculture, and from cement and industrial processes. But the one that we're going to pay attention to right now is that little tiny sliver at the top called F gases. Those stand for fluorinated gases. So those are the chlorofluorocarbons and the hydrochlorofluorocarbons. And they make up refrigerants. So something about the chemical structure of these make them really, really good at being a greenhouse gas and also cooling things like refrigerators, cars, big building chillers. So that's where my first job, when I left my PhD, I decided I'm going to leave this career behind and join a small Chicago-based company with about 20 people that collects and destroys refrigerants. They're called Trade Water, And you might be wondering, like, how is this a business model? So they collected and destroyed refrigerants in varying quantities, all the way from these like tiny 1-pound cans, they're like this tall, through tens of thousands of pound chillers from industrial sites. But even just one can, that big, because it's such a potent greenhouse gas, destroying it is like destroying almost 11,000 pounds of carbon dioxide emissions, because that's how much it impacts the atmosphere. And do y'all know about like the Montreal Protocol? Yeah. So that was banning the production of refrigerants because it was causing a huge hole in the ozone layer, but there's still tons of the material out there. And so what they did was identified it, collected, destroyed it, and then created carbon offset credits to fund that work. So even though it's not carbon, they're carbon dioxide emission equivalents. Mm-hmm. The California one. Yeah. At the time, that was pretty much all there was. I think I haven't been following it since I left a few years ago, but they're looking to expand it. Is there a national one now?
I don't think there's a national one, but I know Europe has their own kind of system.
Yeah. And there's volunteer credits as well. So that's another option.
How do you go about destroying CFCs without?
There are these specialized machines that heat up really, really hot and then it just breaks apart into a variety of components like water. There are some carbon dioxide emissions. And when they're creating the offset credits, they calculate those out, like they subtract them. And that also makes this cool like dragon glass looking thing. Did you have a question?
I was also asking like what the reaction was and all that.
Yeah. Heating it up really, really hot, pretty much. The machines are called PEMs, but I don't know the science behind it. So I was hired to be their first ever full-time data or analytics engineer. Yeah.
How did you come across the organization?
Idealist.org. Yep.
Okay. And then like I guess like thinking about like your background and the transition, like obviously there's a lot of like extracurriculars that were pretty relevant, but like how did you kind of like frame that shift for yourself and for your employer?
Yeah. So I only knew R. I taught myself some SQL so I could do the application. They were looking for someone who cared a lot about the environment and who they thought could learn. Yeah. And that's what I did. So I taught myself everything. Like their systems were pretty like new and small because it's a small company, but I wore a lot of hats, and that's the next point. So I developed their data systems, but I also did things like digital marketing. Like I was just involved with like way more things than I had any background in. But I built data systems that allow us to find customers, make sure we're tracking them like a CRM sort of situation, like how do we call them back, make sure we can collect material. And then importantly, tracking from collection all the way through destruction was very important to create the carbon offset credits. And it had to be like foolproof, right? Every single T had to be crossed and all that. And so I not only built the like database system, but also the business intelligence tools to help them prove that they did it, that they destroyed the material. And then of course, gaining insights into like, where is the refrigerant? How do we find it? And things like that. And in my time there, I contributed to the destruction of 2.2 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, which is a big number, especially for like such a small company. They are having a crazy big impact. And like I never knew about this until I just came across the job posting on Idealist, right? Okay. So in my time there, I also joined an associate board of a nonprofit. So this is another way that you can make an impact. So, you can start stuff while you're in school, you can do grassroots organization building, you can join a refrigerant company, or you can support a local nonprofit. So the Delta Institute seeks to promote a sustainable Midwest, and they're based here in Chicago. I joined their associate board, which is called the DELs, the Delta Emerging Leaders. And they host a variety of events and other fundraising things to promote sustainable entrepreneurship here in Chicago. Typically, it's for like the beginning startup stage. And one of their big events is called Boost. It's sort of like Shark Tank, but crowdfunded. So what happens is about 5 entrepreneurs give their pitch to a crowd of 200 to 300 people, and those people get to vote where their ticket goes to support, and they get a Boost grant to help expand their business in that early stage. So that's a super fun event, usually happens in the fall. And then another typical event we held was Green Soapbox, which gives a microphone and a platform to people, not necessarily entrepreneurs, could be, but just anyone working to build a sustainable community. So their events are pretty cool. If you haven't heard of them, you should look them up. I was on the DELs for 4 years, and I served one of those years as co-chair. And if you're interested, their applications open right now through May 6th. So you can Google them and you can find the application. Drink break, water break, question break. All right. So my previous company, the Tradewater Group, had about 20 employees, and their data systems were scaled as such. And I knew that if I wanted to make a big impact in the climate space, I needed to learn to use cloud computing and deal with larger data sets. And so an opportunity came along to join Spins. It's another Chicago-based company. They're in the natural and organic CPG, or consumer product goods industry. So they're a data firm. They deal with lots of grocery store data. And I joined their data governance team as a data engineer. And I developed and led the adoption of projects and tools to improve data integrity, domain knowledge, and process automation. Some of their teams were doing things that were, more manual, copy paste. And so I worked with them all the way from like people who are just learning SQL to like these amazing software engineers. So a really broad range of people on the data governance team to improve their work. And they're using, big data, big cloud solutions. So this was a really great experience. And one thing I did learn about that, for those who are curious, you got Google Cloud, AWS, whatever else exists. They're all sort of the same. Like, it's okay if you know Google Cloud. If you go to apply to a job and they use AWS, like, it'll be fine. The skills transfer, don't like write yourself off. What's most important is that you learn how to learn. And like, that's the theme throughout here. It's like, I didn't know how to do anything at Tradewater. I taught myself on the job. So never write yourself off for not having a qualification. And I also learned about the importance of being able to work with people of different technological levels. Something I really enjoy and is still true today. So.
Can you talk to us a little bit more about like what this means? Like what exactly, like especially like, and like I guess like what years you were there, because I feel like cloud computing and big data, like it goes through like so many shifts about like what it is and how you define it. So I'm so curious to learn about like what exactly like you were doing within that space.
Yeah. So I was there in 2019 to 2021, so pretty recently. Mm-hmm. And okay, so I'll tell you about the business and I'll tell you more about the technology. So the business side, their clients are people like Sprouts grocery store, or Bob's Red Mill, Annie's Mac and Cheese brands, as well as distributors, but those I hadn't heard of them. So those are more relatable. And we're talking about data like nationwide, millions of sales, right? So like tons of data. And it was an interesting technological challenge because there are all these different cross sections of that data. And if you like break it down too small, you can then like see like this is Sprouts. And then there's like data confidentiality issues, right? So on the data governance team, what we did was a lot of like looking at that like industry knowledge combined with metadata about the data to figure out how to manage that, and then like how to put in place policies to ensure secure access across the platforms. Yeah, so data lives in a whole bunch of different forms. Once it gets that big, a lot of it's Parquet files. I don't know if that's of interest, but some of it's legacy, some of it's new. That's always an interesting problem. A big one that we were solving for when I was there, and that like is still a big problem, is getting data in a place where everyone can access it in like a centralized layer. So there's things called data fabrics that are coming out. And that was just starting when I was there, to give a little context. Is there something specific you wanted me to address?
No, that was super helpful. I feel like I'm still in the process of really just kind of like learning like what the components of something like that are. I'm also curious, like, because I feel like you've been like pretty brave about like taking on transitions, and so like I'm curious what like the cultural transitions were like from, and then I guess like most specifically from a company like Tradewater to like a CPG company like Spins.
The great thing about data and tech companies is that they, well, in my experience, they're not more stressful than the other kinds of companies.
Yeah.
Usually they have really good work-life balance.
Yeah.
So Spins was phenomenal at this, in part because they're like sort of a health company,
Yeah.
right? That's like the other way to describe a lot of those brands. The big thing is just understanding the scale and like complexity of the data that you don't know about.
Yeah.
Because like there's always going to be things you don't know, and so knowing how to navigate and say I don't know the answer, and like just talk to more people and get everybody on board is the big thing when you go to those larger companies. Because yeah, it's complicated, and you got to rely on the people who've been there for a long time. Because you won't learn it all. It's a good question. Okay. So, I was in the natural and organic food space. But an opportunity came along to get at some of these bigger slices of the pie. So let's focus on these two. Carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels is the one that most people give examples of ways that we're currently tackling climate change, right? Things like electric vehicles, renewable energy. Reduce the emissions from this part of the pie. And that's so important. We have to do that. But there are some emission sources from this one and from down here, from the production of things like cement and industrial chemicals, that like literally part of the chemical reaction is releasing carbon dioxide. And some of it's really hard to get around. And so instead of like, can't change the laws of chemistry, and instead of trying to find crazy workarounds around that, what we need to do is find a way to recycle the carbon that gets emitted from those processes. And so not all carbon dioxide can be removed from the economy. We need a scalable way of recycling it. That's where my current company comes in. These 4 pictures from around the globe show how carbon currently comes into our world. So sometimes it's in the form of trash, plastics. Sometimes it's released right into the atmosphere. And sometimes it looks really green, but in reality is burning fossil fuels somewhere else. What we know is that where our carbon comes from will define our future. We can't get rid of all of it from our society. We're too reliant on it. And we need to make a change ASAP. Our climate time bomb is ticking. And like I was saying earlier, like there's just so many parts of our society where we've made this situation where we're not living in homeostasis with our planet. We're making it uninhabitable through all of the processes that we've built in. So what we need is a scalable, commercialized solution to recycle carbon. So LanzaTech has commercialized a decarbonization solution. We use biology and engineering to create or enable a circular carbon economy. And what's cool about this is that it can come from all forms of carbon waste. So whether it's carbon dioxide getting released to the atmosphere or carbon that's already locked in landfills polluting our beautiful planet, it can take that carbon and recycle it into things that we normally make from fossil fuels. So perfume, for example, comes from fossil fuels. A lot of clothing, plastic, water bottles, things like that, those come from fossil fuels and jet fuel. So if we can change the source of all this to coming from fossil fuels to coming from emissions that would normally go into the atmosphere somewhere else, we can recycle the carbon. Okay, how does this work? So the first step is to compress carbon dioxide gas. And you clean it up a little bit. And then we have these giant fermentation reactors filled with microbes that were found originally in the gut of a rabbit. So they're anaerobic bacteria, which means they like to eat carbon dioxide. It's what they're good at. We've engineered them, made them better at it. So what they do is they take in the carbon dioxide and then they produce things like ethanol that normally come from fossil fuels. What's cool is that it doesn't have to just come from industrial off-gas. The carbon can come from anywhere that it currently exists. So for example, agricultural and municipal waste can be gasified, compressed, and then voila, it's carbon dioxide again. And with that ethanol and other byproducts, we can create materials, protein, even things like jet fuel. And then what's cool about that is you can imagine that materials we make, we get the carbon dioxide into plastic bottles that have been used and they're end of life. Those can go back here into the that's a hard word to say, municipal waste stream. And then again, they can be recycled.
How long does this process usually take? And I guess also, like, what's the amount your company have been transitioning after?
So we have 10 commercial plants. We're scaling up. There's more on the way. And as far as how long it takes, so if it's already in the gas stage, it's pretty quick, and these plants are enormous. They're like, I should have had a picture. Maybe I do somewhere, but they're, let me see if I can. You can kind of see how big they are here. So they've got like 4 or 5 of these like absolutely enormous like building size things. So they can take in a lot of carbon dioxide gas, but they can also be small. And that's what's cool about it, is that you can deploy this like to smaller scale sites. It doesn't have to be this huge investment too.
I assume this process takes a lot of energy by itself. Are you guys getting that energy from the gases that you're collecting in the first place to transition, or is it all renewable?
So it depends on the site. Ideally, it would all be renewable. Sometimes it's not in our control. Yeah, it uses energy. It's not as much energy as, it's not as much as creating a lot of fuel, like in the energy space goes.
So it still ends up being net zero as opposed to like negative.
Yeah, yes. Or like in the end, you're reducing emissions, so it's definitely negative emissions. Like we're not just using as much energy as we would release carbon dioxide.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just curious, it's a cool project. I'm wondering like what metrics or what framework you put in place to like measure your like impact on emissions. Because I can see like it's kind of like a chain that is so like I could imagine transportation, everything, and like how much you kind of transport like through your processing. So like maybe one framework you put in place.
Yeah. So this part can happen on site. So if it's like a steel production plant, you just plug it in right at the end. So there's no emissions from transporting from the steel plant to this. And then what happens after, that's that's what it would be anyway, right? Like we produced the plastic bottles or the ethanol that is made to use clothing. And then at that point, it's like just standard to what it would be now. Does that make sense?
So you talked about like scaling up to 10 cents, I think that's what you said, or
Mhm.
something like that. How have your costs, like overall the costs of this process, have they decreased enough to continue to scale? Because I mean that's the biggest, like making this process feasible. It's a great idea, but making it feasible, how is that process work?
Well, that's the point we're at right now, right? So we've proved that it works, and we do have a good amount of investment. We went public about a year ago. And like that is the challenge. I'm not the best person to speak to it because I'm on the artificial intelligence team. So that's like the other side of the company. But I can tell you that they're making good progress and that it looks like it's doable and like scalable. Ethanol specifically is a good molecule to go after. There's other molecules that we can make. Some of them are more techno-economically infeasible than others.
So I guess you might also not be able to answer my question, but because I'm, like the area if I were working in this company, I'd be on the other half.
Yeah.
But one question is your input for you were kind of showing pictures of litter earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Is your input like ever solid litter, or is it purely CO2 gas, or is it like what is your actual input?
Most of our sites are CO2 gas, but there's some coming online that are going to be the solid waste. So the key is you can gasify. Like we've proved that we can do this at smaller scales. You just have to burn it in a specific way, and then it feeds into the pipeline.
Okay. And then my other question, which is what you might not know, but as far as this idea of digesting CO2 and producing ethanol, as far as I understand it, CO2 is generally lower energy than ethanol. So you'd be your bacteria critters aren't getting any energy directly from digesting CO2, or at least I don't understand how that works if they are. So is it coupled to some other process, and that they're thus kind of being, if bacteria could be tricked into doing something like that, they're being tricked into producing a product you want in tandem with something else, or like what's going on?
That's a good question. So the microbe that we use, my understanding is it naturally does produce ethanol. And we've done some genetic modifications to help it along. And that's what my team does.
Okay.
So let's talk about it a little bit. So I joined the artificial intelligence and computational biology team in 2021. And so now I'm using my background in genetics, my passion for sustainability, and my background professionally as a data engineer. And this is my team. It's a few years old, but we live all over the globe, so it's kind of hard to get us in the same place. You can see some of us are photoshopped in. And what do we do? So we use data and computational modeling to understand, engineer, and improve that microbe to do what it's already good at. But basically, because it's an anaerobic bacteria, it has these like pathways that allow it to create ethanol by itself. So we improve the microbe, but also the fermentation technology as well. And we deliver machine learning and computational biology services, both internally to our research and development teams, as well as to our commercial sites. And we are developing the next generation of digital products for our commercial sites using AI. And so joining LanzaTech was a really unique opportunity for me. It's like perfect niche, right? And so in that time, I joined about 3 years ago, and I'm now the lead of the data products team, and I manage 3 software engineers. I'm also the project lead of 2 very large projects in the sciences. They fall within my department, but like people across departments use them and contribute to them. And I'm the program manager for a portfolio of artificial intelligence and other high throughput technologies being developed in the science division. And so at this point, when I think about how to give advice about how to like find this perfect fit and to make an impact at a large company that's doing what you're passionate about, I think what's important is to like follow those passions to find your niche. because that's what makes you unique, and it'll give you the perspective you need to really make a bigger impact and grow in that role. And then, like I alluded to earlier, you're never going to stop learning. What you learn about in school won't be the end, and it won't teach you everything you need to know. But if you learn how to learn, and you learn how to say when you don't know, and then go and find out, you'll succeed. And then lastly, we're fighting this uphill battle, right, against climate change. And so we're going to need everybody's help. So empowering others will service you both to fight the battle against climate change, but also at a company that knows what they're doing and cares about lifting others up. It's the only way to have a bigger impact as a team. And that's the end of my career to this day, at least. So I'll take any more questions if you have them.
Have you seen, like, do you think there has been a similar culture in terms of work culture at the 3 places you worked post grad school, or what do you think those differences were? Especially, so you mentioned in tech there was kind of that work-life balance. What have you thought?
The environmental companies like Tradewater and LanzaTech have, like, that's an important part of their culture, is that everyone's there for the mission. And in some ways that makes it way more fun. And like, I love working there more because of it. And I have more in common with my colleagues. But I would say, like, the balance between work-life, like the work-life balance is more challenging in places like that because we all care so much. If that makes sense. It's not horrible. Like, I still, like, I love being a data engineer. I mostly work 9 to 5. It's great. Much better than academia looked like it was going to be. But yeah, so that's like a big difference, I would say, between those two and then the middle one. And I'm trying to think what else. LanzaTech's super fun because they just have this really good culture. They started in New Zealand, and they've kind of maintained that, like, Kiwi. Everyone's really nice and, like, friendly and wants to be friends with one another. It's really great. Yeah, that's my answer.
In like all of your technical roles, and like you said, there's like uphill learning curve every time. So do you find that these organizations often give you resources to go and learn those skills, or is it just like an on your time kind of thing?
So I've always just done it, like, on the job.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll, like, read an extra book or something. That's on my own time. But that's always a good question to ask during interviews, is like, what type of support will there be? And you don't want to ask it in, like, a way that implies that you're not, like, ready for it. But it will vary a lot. I was on that data governance team, and that team was really small. But then what was great is I got to pair up with these amazing software engineers. They did pair programming there. So I learned a lot that way. And hopefully a good company would also say, like, we will provide you with, you know, LinkedIn Learning and other resources to learn as well. But that's always a good question to ask and get a sense for it.
Yeah, because I think, like, at least with what we're experiencing right now, it's like, okay, you learn Python or SQL, all of it in school, but by the time you get out in 5 years, like, it might be a totally different thing.
Maybe, although I think Python and SQL are, like, those haven't changed my whole time. Yeah, it's just like, which Python libraries are the new thing, you know? Yeah. And, like, the big change, I would say, since I joined was serverless cloud options. Like, it used to be this, everything had to live on its own machine, but now you can spin them up. And, like, knowing how to manage those is more important. Good question.
So just, again, with the bacteria, you're not feeding them anything else besides CO2.
And some, like, important, like, media, you know, like,
So they have food, like, to eat.
but not sugar.
Not sugar, but
No.
they have nothing.
They love carbon dioxide. Look it up. Clostridium autoathenogenum.
Which thing?
Clostridia autoathenogenum. C auto for short. Autoethanogenum. Auto means self, ethano, ethanol, genum, making. Haha, it's in the name. I always forget that the name has a hint. You asked earlier about if I use my genetics anymore. So the answer is yes. So obviously my team includes computational biology, and I'm in a unique position, like none of, is this true? One out of the 3 software engineers has a background in biology, but 2 of them don't. It's very helpful for me to have it. One of the projects I'm a lead of is our scientific knowledge base, which is also hooked up to our genome scale model. And so like it really helps me that I know what genes and enzymes are and how, all the things about them. Yeah. So I'm happy to use it again. It's fun. Yeah. Sativa in the back.
Yeah, I was wondering if you kind of have a little different hats, and I was wondering if you could sort of speak to transferring your skills from one job to another, what that sort of looks like, how you could pass off transferable skills like in an interview, especially if you're looking to career transition or like, maybe pivot slightly and you think some of them are applicable but maybe some aren't.
I think just emphasizing the ones that are is usually what I do. It's worked out thus far. Like a lot of what people care about in tech is that you know how to learn new things and that you're good at things like documentation and working with other people. So you can always emphasize those skills and express interest in learning the things that you don't know yet. Like I had not worked with artificial intelligence before joining this team, but of course I wanted to learn. And like at least in tech, there's not enough software engineers for how many roles there are. So they know that people are going to be learning on the job. I can't speak for the other industries as much, but just being open.
It seems like they use H2 or hydrogen sort of, and that's probably what they
Yeah, it's a blend. That's a good point. Sorry. I don't actively work on that.
No, I'm the one who's the
Yeah.
person here, so that satisfies my curiosity, because at least H2 is higher energy than either of the other 2 molecules involved.
Yep. See, we have these people on our team that study metabolism. That was not in my purview. I studied human genetics. Yep.
In any of the roles that you did, were you ever involved in like an ethics data framework or a way like made sure that the data was never being misused? Because I feel like that's something that I really expected to be in our curriculum for our program, especially, and it's not. And I feel like it's kind of important in the real world.
Yeah, it is really important. We talk about it on my team. Most of what we're doing is biology in a way that we don't have to worry about it as much, but it is something that our team discusses, and I think it's important for all artificial intelligence teams to do so, especially like the work that y'all do. You should be talking about it. You should suggest it, at least to have like maybe like a 3-hour thing.
There's like orgs and stuff that deal with it. I just don't think I don't know if it's just because of like the freshness and like we do have like a guest lecturer this quarter through like Harris, but like I think like it's almost like it hasn't been.
It's too new.
Yeah, it hasn't been formalized enough, So I
Yeah.
think like a lot of the conversations that we end up having about it are outside the classroom, or they are side conversations as we I feel like even as a cohort learn how to talk about these things.
Yeah, there's a great leader in the space called Andrew Ng. NG is his last name. And he has a newsletter that you can sign up for, and they talk about this a lot. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but I think if you Google him, you'll come across it somewhere. And he also has really good materials for learning. They might even have courses on it at this point now. But if you're interested in like large language model prompting, he's a good one. Yeah, and large language models, those are like I know y'all probably have lots of talks about ChatGPT and the use in academia, but learning to engineer the prompts is very helpful. And I think if I could give like one piece of advice to people who are trying to go into tech, it would be to learn that. It's not that technically hard. Like anyone could do it. It's a little goofy at times.
I think the reason I kind of raised the AI question is like we have these kind of processes, but like more and more I'm seeing people going towards geoengineering, which has a lot of planetary risks, and if you mess with even one variable that you shouldn't or you haven't taken into account, it can cause really large scale damage.
Yeah.
So I think that's it's like constantly on my mind because that's what I want to go into.
Yeah. It's an interesting space because we have to make bold moves, but we don't understand the full scope of what we're doing.
I don't even understand clouds.
I want to do in lab work for that. I'd like to do some wet labs research.
I would love for us to be a little bit slower with it and prioritize what we're good at because we do not even understand clouds completely.
That's why we need the research on it, though.
The research is one thing, implementing models.
Well, no, we need to have, we need to be able to do. And I'm not going to touch whether we're going to do large scale outside research or small scale outside research.
I think that's what I'm alluding to. Is like the problem is that like prioritize research, put all the R&D into it that you want, but don't prematurely go from research to like scaling that.
Well,
consideration.
but
Research takes time.
So I'm saying not scaled outdoor research.
I think we're talking about different things. I'm talking about scale.
Okay, yeah, because I'm not sure. I was saying I'm not going to touch the debate. Do you know Professor Keith? Have you heard of him?
Yeah.
So you know his experiment with like the 1 kilogram, whatever thing.
No, but I think I just like read that a new institute had opened in Chicago.
Yeah,
the geoengineering one.
But he a while ago tried to basically release 1 kilogram of an aerosol that it was one of the sulfate aerosol type things that is how it's one of those ones that people are really interested in, but it became like really politicized and then the experiment got shut down. So
That's a different scale.
it's kind of, I'm not sure what to, like I can understand that scientifically like we're setting tons of that same thing into the troposphere, not the stratosphere, from like fossil fuel emissions. But I also like I understand how the people felt like it would be a slippery slope. So I also because there's no regulation in this area whatsoever.
But I'm less concerned about academics. So like my previous job was like in tech policy, and there are a lot of people out there who like want to go for large scale projects right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not so concerned about academics. Like I don't necessarily think it's bad, but I think the fact that there should have been something saying yes it can be done or no it can't be done, and that there should be a group of people agreeing on it somewhere out there.
I think they're trying to get that going.
And ideally, yeah,
I think
they're trying. There's been a lot of attempts. Ideally, the attempt also includes people from the southern continents and not just people from Europe and the U.S. But we'll see how that goes.
As someone from the Caribbean, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know it was a question for you back then, but I'm wondering like when you graduate from school, have you ever debated about like going into a lab that focus on environmental issues rather than going into industry? Because that is kind of like where I'm thinking about now.
Yeah. I sort of thought about it. Before I applied to grad school, it did cross my mind, but I had a lot of people in my life telling me that I could never have a career in sustainability. So I wrote it off. And then at some point it just obviously got too much, and I said, I'm taking a chance, I'm leaving. Like what I'm doing here isn't gonna make a difference. That's an option, a totally valid one, and I have no qualms against it, or like, yeah. It's a big challenge. We need everyone on board, right? So that's what this was all about. We need people doing the research and doing it properly. We need people who are taking the big risks, and we need people like advocating for things that are as old as time, like just organic farming, y'all, right? Like, why can't we do these things?
I'm just curious, given your passion for climate action and how you've been invested in it, I'm wondering like over the past few years, like are there like books you've read about climate change that you interest or that you would recommend one read?
Specifically about climate change. Oh, good question. I have not found myself gravitating towards those books. I've been gravitating more towards the things, and this is actually my final slide, more like the soft skills and how to improve the organization I'm in. So either more data engineering related, or I'm going to recommend 2 books that you won't learn in school. So emotional intelligence, if you've heard of it, there's this book EQ 2.0. It teaches you all the things that you wish you knew in school. That first transition into industry is a big personal growth time. So that one, and then crucial conversations as well is the second one. So I don't have a good climate book for you. I'm sorry.
What did you prompt the?
Good question. I wish I had copied it. It was probably something so I used Microsoft Copilot, which has an image generator. So I said something like, create an image that shows the winding road and everybody contributing to solving climate change. That's probably what I wrote. Yep. They gave me 4 different ones, and I like this one the most. Except for that it looks like that plane is going to crash into the, I don't like that. Okay, I just have one more slide. Some takeaways for you to bring with you. So follow your passion, even if it's something that you have not heard of and you don't know if it exists yet. Just follow your passion. It's what makes you unique. Build your skills and utilize your strengths. These are the books that I recommended. And then it's gonna take a really large village to solve this problem. So no matter where you end up, even if it's not directly fighting climate change, we need people everywhere being the advocate for the right thing and pushing their companies to do better. And so together we can climb the mountain and solve this problem, hopefully. So thank you all.